Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 222 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have a small crew this week. Krim was away in London for a certain Magic event, maybe the Mythic Championship, but Richard, the owner of MTG Goldfish, is around. How's it going today, Richard?
Hey Seth, I'm alive. I survived the weekend. Those 1 a.m. start times were rough, Seth. They were rough.
I am very impressed. I did what I said I was going to do last week, where I slept normally and tried to get up early, and I would pop in around like 5:30, 6 a.m. My time, and there was Richard up all night, like doing the Pro Tour. So I am very impressed with your dedication to staying up all night for the Pro Tour.
You know what? It was easy because a hot take, we're going to talk about it today, but I think the limited portion of the Mythic Championship was the most interesting. So I actually wanted to see that front end part that we typically skip and sleep in on when it's at weird hours.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess that's one of our big topics for today, actually. We're going to talk War of the Spark Limited in the context of pre-release events. Now we're going to talk about Mythic Championship London, everything from that. We had a weird sort of surprise product announcement with some sweet Japanese Planeswalkers. We'll get to that. And then, of course, fish mail. But before we jump into it, a reminder that our sponsor today is Spikes Academy, the world's first Magic the Gathering e-learning academy. They have some really cool courses by really great players, and you can even get 10% off with the code GOLDFISH over at spikesacademy.com. And to learn more, check out Spikes_Academy on Twitter. So thank you to Spikes Academy for their support, and let's jump into it, and let's kick things off today with War of the Spark. It was pre-release weekend. Richard, did you happen to somehow in your crazy 1 a.m. Pro Tour schedule also find yourself at a pre-release this weekend?
Thanks to the magic that is downtime during coverage, Seth. I was playing Arena. I was playing War of the Spark pre-release events. It's sealed on Magic Arena at the moment. So I actually got a ton of those in. So I played a lot of War of the Spark. I'm a War of the Spark expert at this point, Seth. I think I have like 60 packs or something. And so each time you draft, you get like or each time you do sealed, you get 3 packs, right? So that's at least 20 that I've done.
Wow. Oh, I was also playing Arena in between, but I was working on like Against the Odds and some of the video series. So I snuck in a couple of pre-release seals, but you're the expert for sure. I think I did 2, maybe 3 at the most. So you're way ahead of me. So Richard, what do you think about this limited format? How was your digital pre-release experience?
Like greatest limited set ever? I don't know. So it is very, very fun. The uncommon planeswalkers and the power level of the commons makes it extremely fun. And the only question I have whether it's going to be like the greatest set of all time is how balanced the archetypes are. And, you know, like with Innistrad, you could do basically anything you felt like it. Can we do that with War of the Spark, or will there only be like 2 archetypes? But in terms of players and the playing experience, I thought it was mechanics wise, like the best set ever, like literally the best set ever. It was just so fun to play and to have all the planeswalkers and then to like kill their sparks and whatever. It was just insanely fun playing the game.
Yeah. I thought it was a lot of fun too. I'm personally more of like a draft person than a sealed person, but there's just so many really sweet cards in this set that it's very unique. It is a super unique limited format because of all the planeswalkers. So you always have crazy stuff going on, and I was impressed that it didn't feel too oppressively like bomby. Like, yes, sometimes your opponent has like Liliana Dreadhorde General or something, but in general, for a set that has 36 planeswalkers running around in it, it wasn't as swingy and bomby as I thought it would be. And there were a lot of like long, pretty like grindy games of Magic with this weird planeswalker value and good removal. So it seemed like a really fun format to me in the couple of pre-releases I did. The one thing I did notice that was a little weird, it felt really light on mana fixing. I had a lot of pools where I wanted to be 3 colors because of like my rares or just like how the pool broke down. But there's like no mana fixing in that set. So what did you think about that? Did you have a hard time going into 3 colors because of the lack of really hardly any fixing at all in the set?
I love it. So usually there's ample fixing and you can jam like 4-color miscellaneous stuff. So I like that we have a set where you can't do that. And you can do that in one specific archetype or color. I mean, so green has 2 mana dorks that can fix color, or 3 mana dorks, I guess, with there's the 2/4, the 2/1, and then the 2/3 death touch. And then they also have the enchantment land thing that, ramps your mana and fixes it. So green has the ability to do like 5-color nonsense decks. Everyone else has to resort to like if you open any gateway plazas and things like that. So I like it, right? Like I was sad because, I wanted to build a Grixis deck because I opened Nicol Bolas. And I'm like, this thing is like nigh uncastable given my pool. like even though like the rest of my cards were primarily Grixis, it's like blue, black, 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 red. I'm like, I can never cast this thing. So that was a little sad. But I did build a couple like 4-color decks. They're typically, I don't know how I feel about them, especially in sealed, because you can't make them consistent enough. So when you get like reasonable mana, you crush, but then a lot of times you just dirtle and then die because they play a planeswalker, you're trying to fix mana, and now you're super far behind.
Yeah, I ran into that problem trying to splash into a 3rd color, and I think, like you said, unless you're in green, I would definitely recommend trying to stick to 2 colors if possible. It's even difficult to like splash a single card or 2 from another color. I wanted to like splash a couple removal spells, and the price is really high. There's the one like double tapped Guildgate, the one that fixes for any color.
Yeah.
Then there's a couple of like bad artifacts, but there is very minimal fixing outside of green.
Yeah, there's the 3 mana rock, and then the 4 mana one that adds 1 of 2 colors. Super awkward. Cause like I was trying to use it to fix like a white spell. And then I'm like, oh, you can't even do that, huh? So I like it. I like it that there's actual choices being made as opposed to I'll just put Evolving Wilds in and now my mana's perfect, right? So I like it.
So what stuck out to you? You've done 20 sealeds or something. What stuck out as favorite cards or best cards, along with like archetypes? Were there any color combinations that just seemed super awesome and powerful?
I like to play green-based decks. I think Proliferate is really strong. Either the green-white Proliferate deck is pretty good. But even like green, black, you proliferating your army tokens. So army was a mechanic that I did not expect to be so good. It is so good. Proliferate is so good. When we saw these mechanics, I was like, yeah, okay, random limited mechanics, but they actually make the game pretty interesting. And it usually does come down to those like army tokens. So I like those. The uncommon planeswalkers are pretty good. I would have thought they would either suck or would be too powerful, but it seems just right where it's a threat, but like a threat you can deal with. So it's like playing like, I don't know, like Lingering Souls or something, except everyone has access to Lingering Souls. It's like pretty good, but if everyone else has access to it, it's kind of balanced. And the actual bombs of the set, I think, are the gods. Oketra in specific. If you open Oketra in your pool, congratulations, you just won. There's like no way to deal with it, right? Like there's like 2 enchantments to deal with Oketra. Otherwise you kill it. And if you can't kill your opponent in 3 turns, it's coming back. And one of the grossest plays I've ever done was I ramped into Oketra. So turn 4 Oketra. And then I played 2 Ugin's Conjurants for 0 mana. So I was like, cause the biggest way to lose with Oketra is you play Oketra, they remove it, and then they tempo you out, and then you play again, and then they remove it, and then you die. So if you can somehow manage to Oketra and play creatures, so playing 1-drops is a little questionable, but Ugin's Conjurant is not terrible, and playing for 0 gets you a 4/4, and you're good to go. So Oketra's pretty good. All the gods are so annoying. You kill them, and there's no way to get rid of them. Like you have to kill and mill, which is like very difficult, or you use enchantment removal. But like you can't like exile them, but you can't do anything with them. They're actually very annoying. So you just need to kill them before they kill you.
Thankfully they're mythic at least, so they shouldn't show up super often. But yeah, the gods are pretty insane. I was also very impressed with the uncommon planeswalkers. I had an Ashiok deck. Ashiok's
really good.
I think that might be it's probably the best uncommon Planeswalker in Limited, and it is insane. When people start with 40 cards and draw a 7-card opening hand, if you could just keep your Ashiok on the battlefield, your odds of milling your opponent out are really high. So Ashiok was a bomb, and a lot of the uncommon Planeswalkers just feel like playable cards. Like, I had Kaya in one of my decks. The double exile removal spell
That's the best Planeswalker. I disagree with your Ashiok. Kaya is the best. Like, a double exile. Ashiok is good, except Ashiok, like, if you don't actually mill them, like, you kind of just did nothing. But if you mill, Davriel is really good. The discard Planeswalker, like, usually it's a 2-for-1, and then it sits there and, like, pings them to death. Saheeli is extremely good. Tibalt, surprisingly good. Nahiri is good. The only ones, like, I don't like are, like, maybe, like, Samit, Huatli, Nissa. Oh, the green one, the Yangu, is really good. Yeah. They're all really good.
You didn't like Nissa as far as one of the rare Planeswalkers?
Oh, no, the untap one. Oh, not Nissa. No. Kiora.
Yeah.
Oh, Nissa's a bomb. the 5-mana, all the 5-mana Planeswalkers are insane. I had some really sweet plays. I ultimated Nissa with the 3-mana 3/2 that proliferates when a land enters the battlefield. So then all my lands became like 8/8s. It was hilarious. But Nissa is like so good. It's like a 3/3, but that has vigilance for some reason. So you can block and it doubles your mana, so you can cast your expensive spells. All of the rare Planeswalkers are pretty good. Even Karn. I actually had like 4 Saheelis, whatever's the 4-mana 2/3 flyings and like the 2-mana cycle in my sideboard. So I'm like, yeah, I'll just play Karn and just use it as like a terrible divination. And it actually worked. So I don't know.
I got absolutely wrecked by Rare Ajani one game. Like the -2 anthems your team, plus vigilance, plus it like proliferates on your Planeswalkers essentially. Oh man, that card felt so brutal. I had what did I have in hand? The black finale. And I was like, all right, one more land and I get to kill their board. I'll be good. And then they're like, play Ajani, give everything +1/+1. So the toughness grows. I'm like, oh no, now I gotta get 2 more lands. And then they do it again. And I could never get the toughness low enough to actually kill stuff with my finale. So that was a brutal loss to Ajani there.
Like all of them are really, really, I think Ral Zarek is actually the best one. Like it has so much loyalty. If you untap minus and double removal, it's pretty much over.
Ugin is pretty bomby too,
Ugin is pretty good. Jace is pretty good. Like Jace can mill you or mill the opponent. Like they all have so much loyalty and they draw cards. Chandra is surprisingly good. When I looked at Chandra, I'm like, oh, it seems bad, but you can keep +1ing and you deal a ton of damage with Chandra. And I actually killed someone by, what is the 1-mana black spell that removes 5 counters?
Oh,
Price of Betrayal or something like that.
Yeah. That sounds right.
I got lethal on someone by doing it on my own Chandra to remove 5 counters to ping someone for 5 for lethal. So they're all really good. The only ones I haven't played with are Liliana and Gideon. Many people have played Gideon against me, and I've seen one Liliana, but I haven't personally opened them. But Gideon is also extremely good.
I have not. Yeah, those are the mythic ones, so they're a little bit rarer. I played against Liliana, and it seems really good. It seems like it's definitely a bomb. Gideon is also like a really fast clock, but for some reason it feels less unbeatable. Like you can just use a removal spell on it and not get too far behind. But if Liliana sits out for a couple turns, oh my goodness, it is brutal.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's really fun. Like, I was playing Hearthstone the other day, and every time I play Hearthstone, it's like the same, like literally the same. Like it's been, I don't know how many years, and yeah, there are new mechanics or whatever, but it feels basically the same. But you know, when we play Magic, every single time, every single set feels very different, and this set is like exceptionally different. Playing with all these Planeswalker characters and how the game actually plays out, like you always have that tough decision to make, like, should I go after the Planeswalker? Should I go after the person? Should I run out my own Planeswalker? Can I defend it? And it's really fun. Like I was actually surprised, and I am going to be sad when this set goes away and we'll go back to like normal, boring creature combat.
Of Core Set 2020 on the horizon. Hooray.
Like, I don't know. It's all these characters too, right? Like, you're like, oh, it's this guy, right? Like, I don't know. It's very fun.
Well, let's transition, still sticking with Limited, but transition from talking pre-release to talking a little bit about our Mythic Championship. So, while we're on the theme of Limited, Richard, you were up all night watching Limited. What did you think of Pro Tour level or Mythic Championship level Limited?
So it was especially tough. I thought the commentators did a pretty good job. So there were some times where there was a card in the battlefield and they didn't know what it was because the set was so new. Like literally, a lot of the players and the people around the game, they just saw it for the first time. So they couldn't commentate on the cards as well. But I followed around decently. I thought there's a lot of interesting gameplay that happened in the matches, and I actually felt it was more interesting than watching Modern. But I don't know. I really liked it. I like War of the Spark so much, Seth. Like I don't know what happened, but I was like, oh man, Limited is on. Like, geez, like, you know, run out, coffee's not even done, and like start watching. Like, I'm like, oh, pack one, pick one. What's he gonna do? Like, oh no, right? Like, I don't know. It was actually very exciting, but for new players, I'm like, I don't think they can understand what's going on. They tried this new thing where they tried to rank power level. So when they flashed up a card, they had like a 5-star rating system where they were like, oh, this is how good the card is in a vacuum. It was so small and barely touched upon that I don't know that it did anything. And the other thing,
yeah, and it's so hard to rank cards in a vacuum too. Like a card that could have a low rating can be really good on a certain board state or vice versa. So I'm glad they tried, but it was a little bit weird.
Yeah. And I don't know, coverage was basically the same. So one of my big disappointments was, you know, with the Mythic Invitational, they like upped the coverage like 1,000,000 times. And we're like, okay, is it going to carry over to the paper championships now that they figured it out? And it was basically the same old with Cardboard Live enabled. So I was hoping it would be better, but it was like just kind of a regular Pro Tour in that sense. But I thought the War of the Spark cards, were pretty cool. They had these little promo segments where they would explain the new cards and the new mechanics, and how they work. Like they explained proliferate and things like that. And I thought that was really good. That's especially good for new players. And then, of course, the new players were slammed into watching like Tron versus Affinity with like 1,000,000 cards on the battlefield. And I don't think like ever once did they explain how Tron actually worked, right? Or, you know, how Arcbound Ravager or Igmoth Nexus gets a kill or anything. So that part was probably super confusing for new players. And I think that probably played a factor into the numbers we saw. Like if you were a new player, no way you would understand anything. Like just the basic fact that 3 Tron lands gives you 7 mana and stuff like that, like was not covered. And it's just tough to follow along. Like it's exceptionally tough. Like it's tough following a standard set. It is impossible to follow a modern set without knowing what all the cards do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Like coverage, it wasn't bad by any means, but it certainly wasn't anything like the Mythic Invitational. We didn't have any pyrotechnics or WWF intros for players or anything, so it felt like a normal Pro Tour for the most part, how they had been for a while. I did like that it felt a little bit more sped up to me. There wasn't as much dead time. They had a lot of these short like filler segments. They were doing time walk matches, so I felt like the pacing was improved to some extent, but it was essentially just a Pro Tour. And you mentioned the numbers were not really great. I think on Sunday for the top 8 we broke 20,000, maybe we got up close to 25, but we were mostly hovering like 18 to 20 for most of the weekend. And last time we had a Modern Pro Tour we had like 45k or something, so it was very low viewer wise. It might be a combination of things. I think you're right, it is hard for new players. Also, it's pre-release weekend. I tweeted about it and a lot of people were like, I like playing Magic more than I like watching Magic, so I went to pre-release instead of watching the Mythic Championship. Some people said they didn't even realize that Mythic Championship was actually a Pro Tour. they with the rebranding of the name, they were like, wow. I didn't even realize this was actually a Pro Tour event. I just thought it was like some random tournament.
Yeah, there were some competing factors like the Hearthstone I don't even know what it's called, the Hearthstone World Championship.
I think it's Worlds, yeah.
It was going on. Avengers Endgame is out this weekend. You know, if I had the choice of squinting and reading cards on screen or watching, you know, Captain America, like, what do you think I'm going to do? And then also the pre-release and also Magic Arena. Like, I will admit, sometimes the round started and I was in the middle of my match and I'm like, screw this match. I'm going to keep playing, right? Like, you know, so yeah, there's a lot of competing factors, but the numbers were disappointing, and it was disappointing that the level of effort didn't seem to increase, right? Or it's not effort. Effort's the wrong word. Budget, right? Like, they didn't pay for the Twitch embeds. They didn't pay people for the sponsored and restream and things like that. So, Modern, Paper's last hope. I go on Legacy. Technically alive, but kind of unsupported.
Well, we'll see. The numbers are disappointing. I will be more concerned if we see similar numbers next Mythic Championship, which is also going to be Modern, but it's going to be Modern Horizons, presumably not on a pre-release / Avengers Endgame weekend. So if we see similar numbers at the next Pro Tour, then I'm going to be like, oh man, something is really wrong. But for now, they are definitely concerning, but I'm not going to be overly concerned just because there's so many different factors.
Yeah, someone at WotC needs to get onto the scheduling plan here. We've had like a Valentine's Day one. We've had like a Super Bowl weekend one. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, can you not move it by a week? Like, I don't understand, right? Like, what constraints does WotC actually have?
Well, let's move on from talking about how they covered the Mythic Championship and talk a little bit about constructed at the Mythic Championship. So, the format, as you mentioned, was Modern. In the end, we had a top 8 that was mostly humans in Tron, along with one Phoenix deck, one Titan Shift deck, one Affinity deck. So, Richard, what did you make of the actual results of the Modern portion of the tournament?
So it looked like normal Modern. So there was a big fear that with the London Mulligan and open deck lists that, you know, Modern would be this Wild West and no one knows what's going on, but it was basically the same thing, except players played slightly differently and their decks were slightly configured differently with a lot of main deck graveyard hate and things like that. But other than that, it looked like a normal Modern event. And the usual suspects showed up, and then the usual suspects won, and then that was that. So nothing too crazy with all the changes, the 2 changes. And I actually think of the 2 changes, open deck lists played a bigger role than the London Mulligan. But WotC's collecting that data, so we'll see from their report. I'm sure they'll write an article about it.
Yeah, I hope they do write an article about it. It will be interesting. The London Mulligan rule, in some sense, I agree with you. Definitely everyone playing broken turn 1 decks, that was not realized. I think the combination, as you mentioned, of open deck lists and the Mulligan rule did have a big effect on the tournament, and we did see some sort of, I guess I would call them London Mulligan rule non-games. But the non-games, they weren't necessarily people winning on turn 1. It was more people being able to mulligan into their Rest in Peace or double Leyline of the Void against a deck that's trying to do something unfair. And then just like having nothing happen. We had one game on camera near the end of the Swiss where Mono Red Eldrazi just had like the triple Leyline draw against Dredge and just like put them all into play and had one land in hand and did nothing for a bunch of turns, but still won because they had 3 Leylines. So I think there was definitely an impact, but it wasn't everyone's comboing off on turn 1. The metagame looked more or less similar to what you would expect. More Tron, more Dredge maybe compared to the broader metagame, but within the realm of reason, I guess. Nothing was too out of whack. So it'll be interesting. Do you have any sense moving out of this tournament as far as expectations for this new Mulligan rule? Like based on this weekend, do you think we're just going to see it implemented game-wide in a couple of months? They said M20 was the time frame, assuming it did actually go into effect.
I think we'll see it. I think all the pros seem to be for it. It leads to way more actual games of Magic, which is kind of the one thing that kind of stops new players, where you sit down and play a game of Magic. And, you know what's worse than being stone rained and wastelanded out of the game? Like, you just do it to yourself by not drawing lands or not drawing the right cards. Like, it's literally land destruction that happens on you just by RNG, right? So it feels really bad. And Modern didn't seem adversely impacted. And even if it was slightly, I think they'd go ahead and do it anyway. Like, their priority is Standard and Limited, and everyone was saying that this is great for those formats. So I think it's going to happen. And WotC's collecting the data. On the match slips, they were asking people, you know, who won, who lost, how many mulligans, right? So they were actually collecting that data for all of the matches, not just the feature match. So they'll have a lot of data, and I suspect we're just going to go with it because nothing was incredibly broken. It's not like these weird decks came out of the woodworks. Older formats will have to adjust, but Standard and Limited, where WotC makes all their money, were significantly improved. So I expect this to go.
I also expect it to go through. I don't know if I agree that it leads to less non-games. I think it leads to a different type of non-game that I was kind of talking about before, where people find their Haymaker sideboard cards or the Haymaker's traditionally sideboard card that they're playing in their main deck now. So I don't know if it actually led to less non-games in Modern, but still, like you said, Wizards' main focus is Standard and Limited, and I think that this weekend wasn't so much of a disaster by any stretch that Wizards is going to be like, oh my god, we can't do this. Sure, there are some things that maybe it's not great for Modern. Maybe it's like roughly the same in terms of number of non-games, all things considered. But when you consider how much it potentially benefits other formats, I think Wizards will deal with whatever consequences there are in Vintage and Legacy and Modern for the sake of Standard and Limited being better.
Yes. How will it affect Commander, Seth? I think it'll be great. I think this is like you don't want to be punished for you want your deck to be more inherently consistent, right? I think that is a good thing, except for when you have broken combos. And if broken combos are, screwing everything up, then ban the combos, right? And make it so that when you build a deck, you have a reasonable chance of playing the deck you built as opposed to drawing all the bad cards and then dying. So I like it.
So, one of the other things that kind of happened, Matt Sperling ended up second at the Pro Tour with Affinity, which is interesting anyway, because Affinity's mostly gone by the wayside for hardened scales at this point, so just like old school Affinity doing well. But the twist here is, theoretically, Matt didn't even make the top 8. He was in 9th place, but then we found out going out of the Swiss and into the top 8 that, Yuya Watanabe ended up getting DQ'd from the tournament for having marked sleeves. So, Richard, what did you think about the Yuya situation?
Yeah. So Yuya Watanabe, not Yuya Watanabe. That was especially soul crushing for me because I was cheering him on the entire tournament. I love the Japanese players, and he got DQ'd for marked sleeves. And they concluded that the Tron lands were marked in a certain way, and we have no other additional information outside of this, but they are reviewing it. So he was obviously DQ'd from the tournament. So that can happen. I think no matter what your intent was, whether you were cheating or not cheating, you're going to get DQ'd, I think. And then they're looking at his MPL eligibility, his Hall of Fame status. But I'm going to assume that their ruling was correct. Like, he is a Hall of Famer. He is MPL. You are not going to lightly throw these accusations out. And these judges have been trained to look at this for a long time. So my belief is they double, triple, quadruple checks before making this decision. So, their ruling is their ruling. And there's nothing more to comment, right? And I don't know that Wizards will add any more information. I guess they probably won't. Right. So I think that's all we're going to hear about this. Right. But it was very disappointing because a lot of people looked up to him and I was cheering him on and it's just one of those things that paper magic comes with, right? Like, you can't really cheat on Arena, especially if it's like in-person Arena. Like, there's no way to really cheat. But with paper, there's so many cheats and misplays and accidents, things that can go awry, intentional or not, that, this stuff comes up. And every time it comes up, it looks bad for the game, right? Right? Like, kind of a mark on Magic's eye for this weekend.
Yeah, definitely disappointing. I always root for Yuya too. He's just such a great player. I think it's pretty clear that the sleeves are marked. I think that people that are talking about the situation and wondering, like, if the sleeves are marked, I think that's kind of off base. There's no way that multiple judges would have, like, gone through this process and DQ'd Yuya if the sleeves weren't marked. I think the question comes down to whether it was intentional or not. I guess we'll find out. I don't think we'll ever get pictures of the sleeves or some of the stuff people are asking for, but we'll find out, because either there will be some sort of consequences coming down from the DCI or from Wizards as far as the MPL, or nothing will happen, and that'll kind of be the answer to it. So I'm not expecting Wizards to, like, go out of their way to address the situation, unless there is some sort of consequences where there's, like, a banning, a suspension, DCI suspension or something. Then that would probably become public. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some sort of consequences, just because we had an MPL player that was held out of the Mythic Invitational based on a DQ for opportunistic cheating, even though the situation was a little bit, it wasn't like any savage premeditated cheat or anything. So I think that the MPL is held to a higher standard, rightly or wrongly. I would assume rightly. So I think there's a chance there will be something. Maybe you have to skip a pro tour or something, and then if Wizards does determine it was intentional, then I guess it'll be up to them to determine the proper course of action. So I'm like you. I'm mostly just disappointed.
I think it's going to be all or nothing punishment. Either you declare innocence and no punishment, or you declare guilty and ban from everything. Like, I just can't see, like, oh yes, the cheating happened and you're only gone for like one pro tour or something like that. I just can't see, because these people are the face of the Magic brand. So they are held to a higher standard. So I don't see them making like this kind of gray decision. I think it's going to be, everything or nothing.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I guess the argument I would see is if it was like, there wasn't cheating, but you're an MPL player and you should have went to the next level and made sure that your sleeves were not in that condition.
I guess that makes sense.
Maybe there could be like a middle ground, like, we're going to make you not go to the next pro tour because you should have been more aware of that as an MPL player, but we believe you didn't actually do this intentionally.
Do you think they would be like, you're banned from paper Magic, but digital Magic is fine because it's I don't think they would ever do that, right? Like, because, MPL will be online. Or is it? I don't actually know.
I mean, I don't know if they would actually ban someone's arena account as far as just being able to play, but I assume that you would not be able to play Mythic Championships in either if you were banned. Like, yeah. I think it would go both ways. Any other Pro Tour / Mythic Championship thoughts, Richard, before we move on to our next topic?
Oh, we didn't talk about Open Deck List. So
we did not talk about Open Deck Lists.
They had the Cardboard Live extension, and I don't know how successful that was. I know we used it to get deck lists to share, but once you've seen one Tron deck, like, do you need to see other Tron decks? But because of that, they made deck lists public starting from round 4 or 5 or something like that. And I think that actually had an impact on the game, because when you sit down and you're mulliganing, sometimes you have like a hand that's great against aggro, but bad against control, or great against combo, but terrible against aggro. And like, you don't know what your opponent is doing. So you have to kind of do like a blind mulligan there. Now you don't have to. You look at their deck list, like, oh, I know what you're playing, so I know if my hand is good or not. So you get to make that choice. When you play cards like Meddling Mage, it is not so blind now, right? You know their exact deck list. You know how many exact Ugins, Oblivion Stones, or whatever they're playing. So you can make an informed choice of what to name and what has a higher likelihood of being drawn. So I think there was a tangible impact to the game. I don't know how they would measure that, but what did you think, Seth? What did you think about these deck lists? And the other thing interesting was full main decks, sideboards, they only gave you the cards, but not the numbers. And I don't know why it had to be this complicated. Like,
yeah, that part is a little weird. I don't understand, like, how much of the numbers of sideboard cards actually matter. I don't know. I will say I really like Cardboard Live. I think that's a really significant addition to coverage. So that part is definitely good. As far as the open deck list part, I think the impact is a little more complicated. I'm not really sure if that's good or not. I tend to think if it improves coverage enough that it's probably a good change, just because coverage is pretty important if you're going to try to be an esport. So there is a cost to having open deck lists, and it does improve some decks, make some decks worse, make some cards better. I think open deck lists, along with the London Mulligan rule, is why we saw this major trend towards main deck graveyard hate. Just looking through, they published all 550 some lists. Looking through the list, so many decks are playing some amount of graveyard hate, and that's partly because of the format, but it's partly because you know if you're playing against Dredge, or Is It Phoenix, or another deck that's soft to that, and you can use the London Mulligan rule to find it, and if it's not a matchup where that's good, you can use the London Mulligan rule theoretically to put your graveyard hate on the bottom and not have it. So I feel like there was a pretty big impact there. Whether or not it's good or bad, it's really hard to say. I think that the benefits for coverage probably outweigh the drawback of like rogue decks doing worse or sideboard hosers being more consistent. But I don't know. Do you think this is something they stick with? Do you think this is another test where they're seeing how this goes and we might see this moving forward?
I think they will stick with it because they seem to really like it. They were talking up Cardboard Live the entire weekend. I would like to see full sideboards. Like, I don't know what this nonsense is with like sideboards with no numbers. Like, why is sideboard less important? Like, why don't you show the main deck with no numbers? Right? Like, I have no idea why it's set up like this. I would just like to see full blown deck lists. I would like to see them not lean so heavily on Cardboard Live. I'd like to see them be displaying the deck list and talking about the decks rather than just saying, click on the extension and look at whatever. I'm sitting on my couch watching TV. I'm not clicking anything, right? So if you're not showing it to me, I'm not seeing it, right? So I like to see them integrate it more, but I do think it's going to stay. I would just like to see full decks. Like, I don't know why it's like these weird, no sideboard number. Like, does it really matter that much? You've gone kind of this far, just go all the way. But I will say that it does affect the game, and probably, like you said, the coverage upside probably outweighs this, but I remember reading so many like legacy articles about identifying your opponent's deck based on their turn one play. Like, if they play Misty Rainforest and fetch up a Volcanic, like, what does that mean? What deck is it? Right? Should you be holding up counters, or like, what does that mean? Right? So that part of the game is gone now with open deck lists. But I think that's a fair sacrifice for improved coverage. And plus, legacy coverage and games are like, right? So
I mean,
yeah.
I think a more meaningful impact to like modern is it does make playing rogue decks or unusual cards worse. Like, a lot of the ways you get value out of playing a weird, unknown or underknown deck is your opponent doesn't have the information about the cards and the deck and its synergies, and you can pick up some extra percentage points and wins because of that. So I think it does make that work worse, which for me personally is disappointing because I like playing weird decks, but I still think that the benefit to coverage probably even outweighs that. The one thing I would say is, I guess I hope they either go all or nothing as far as open deck lists. I think having open deck lists for tournaments that are covered on Twitch for the sake of Cardboard Live is a little bit weird. I would rather just have them be, okay, like Pro Tours and GPs, we're going to all have open deck lists, whether there's Twitch coverage or not, rather than just like select tournaments that happen to be on Twitch get open deck lists.
Yeah, so all our Grand Prix with no video coverage. I would assume the rule would apply there too. Otherwise, it's weird because then you have two different modern formats. One where you have deck lists and one where you don't.
Yeah, so I hope it gets standardized one way or another, and we do it all or nothing regardless of what is on Twitch and what's not. Anyway, let's move on from the world of Mythic Championships. We got one more topic before Fish Mail, and Richard, we got some super sweet, kind of special cards coming in Japanese War of the Spark Packs. Do you want to give us the info on these cards, Richard?
All right, this was the crossover everyone was waiting for. There are like entire TCGs whose brand is built on being anime. And now we have anime, Japanese style art Planeswalkers for all of the Planeswalkers. So they will be in War of the Spark boosters, replacing the regular Planeswalkers 50% of the time. And so that's the Japanese boosters. But they'll also be available in the WPN promo packs during Core Set 2020 season. And they'll they'll be printed in Japanese, but be available worldwide as promos. And that's all we have for now. The kind of face card of this is Liliana. I think the foil version is going for like over $500 or something at the moment, or it was during the weekend. And you need to check them out. It's just like Japanese artists doing their interpretation of the Planeswalkers. And not only that, but there's a lot of stuff going on with the card frame. Like a lot of like stuff is overflowing the card frame, and it looks just a lot cooler than our normal Magic cards. What do you think about these promos, Seth?
They look amazing. I don't really watch anime. I don't know any of these Japanese artists, and these cards look so cool. I think these cards look way cooler than the Mythic Edition Planeswalkers even, or a lot of the other like special cards that we've seen recently. This, I think, is very near the top of the list. The art is just, it's different. And I think, rightly or wrongly, one of the criticisms that we hear of Magic art these days is it tends to all look the same. They've gotten much more on top of keeping this like cohesive artwork between sets, and I think that's probably good in a lot of ways, but I think in some ways it's part of what makes these Planeswalkers so exciting is they just don't look like typical Magic cards. They're coming out of the frame, the art is super unique, they look like anime characters, so I love these. I assume that people that like know and love anime and these artists love them even more. But even for me, who's just like, oh, that's a really cool looking Magic card, I think these Planeswalkers are spectacular. And I'm also shout out to Wizards who managed to keep this under wraps. In a world of leaks and stuff trickling out, no one was talking about these, leaking these until the official announcement went up the beginning of last week. Just like, oh, by surprise, spoiler season's done. Here's all these really awesome Planeswalkers.
Yeah, to be fair, if someone leaked it, no one would believe them. They're like, what? Like, why would it be anime? But it's like, if you don't know, Seth, the Liliana is made by Yoshitaka Amano. And he is famous for the Final Fantasy art. Have you ever played Final Fantasy? Like the
little bit a long time ago.
Yeah. So if you did and you remember, you'll see that art is very similar because it's the same artist. And that is, partially why, the Liliana is so expensive, because it's a very famous person. The art is awesome and it's an iconic character. I wish we had more of that. Like, I don't even know what it would be. Like, I don't know, like, what are mainstream, like, like a Bob Ross art, but like that can't be done anymore, right? But like, it would be something like that, right? Like someone who's famous, for making game art, and then they make a Magic card.
Maybe like comic book artists, like do the same thing with like American comic book artists that have their own like style and stuff.
That would be incredible. Can you imagine like a superhero? I know you don't know anything about Avengers, but
I'm sure I would think they were sweet.
Oh yeah, that is a really good point. Like the comic book art style, like that would be very sweet. Like we have a lot of opportunity to make cool Magic promos. So I'm excited that they're doing this. I want one of these Lilianas.
Are you going to buy a $500 Liliana, Richard?
No, but I'm hoping it comes onto Magic Online.
I believe, because I've cracked a few treasure chests, I believe they are all on Magic Online and treasure chests. Because I opened a couple of them. Yes.
Are they in English?
They are in English.
Okay, I'm ready for this, because one of the things is these Planeswalkers, like normally, like Cryptic Command, there's like one Cryptic Command, right? So you know what it is. But now you have 36 of these. They all have a static ability and up to 3 abilities. And like, you don't even know the name of the planes. You're like, yeah, okay, it's Vivian, but which version of Vivian? Like, what is her actual name? Like, I have no idea. So being in Japanese is actually very confusing. So, yeah.
The only downside I would say is apparently local game stores, they said in the article, like, oh, these are going to be available everywhere. You can buy boxes even if you're not in Japan. But apparently, like, game stores had to put in their orders for Japanese boxes, like, a few weeks ago, and no one knew that these Planeswalkers were part of them, and there would be, like, absurdly high demand for Japanese boxes for this set. So it's going to be a little bit awkward as far as getting your hands on these boxes outside of actually being in Japan, where this is, like, the normal language for your Magic cards.
Yeah, just confuse people. Just get like normal card. That's Japanese version. Then get promo Karn. That's also Japanese. And you're like, I'm playing Karn Tribal. Good luck.
All right. I think that it is time to answer some fish mail. So, Richard, lead us through some fish mail questions.
All right. If you have questions, send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail, and we'll get to your questions on air. Manseer Legros, your Brazella's end deck made me think how there are tons of stacked cards that suffer because Modern is so fast, like Gisela. What are some of your favorite cards that seem really strong, but just can't make the cut? For me, it's Underworld Cerberus.
Oh boy. Flashbacks of the beginning. Yes, that is, I was going to say, of the beginning of the cast with Chaz and his Underworld Services. I'm going to say, Heartless Summoning. That's a card that just, it screams I could be broken, and it never actually ends up being broken.
It depends if they print something that you can heartlessly summon and Thoughtseize people. Like that, I think without disruption, like you can't play these fair cards. Same with Underworld Servers. It's like too fair. You need some combo where you can loop it, and it didn't even see play in Standard. So to see play in Modern, it has to be part of a combo deck, not as like a value card. K Frizzle. Now that the Japanese Planeswalkers are a thing, will there be a way to add them to our deck list, and will their prices be listed on the site with links to purchase them? So you can add them to your deck list. So there's an option to use specific card versions on the deck list. Currently we don't have prices for them though, because they are so rare, and the prices aren't available yet. But when we get the prices, they'll just automatically show up. So yes, you can actually do that. Mint Black Lotus, can Richard put format legality markers on card pages? Yes, that is happening. And Cesaros, with so many Planeswalkers coming out and a good amount of legendaries still being played, do you feel it'd be better or worse to go back to the rule of one player being able to control a particular legendary? So this is the old legendary rule, where if you had like a Liliana the Veil and I played Liliana the Veil, your Liliana the Veil died.
I think that it would make the game worse. I think it's a relatively unfun rule now that we've seen how it works without that rule.
Yep.
To be able to not play your cool card or have your cool card killed because your opponent also has a copy. So I think it would make the game less fun, actually.
Yeah, I get what they're going with, like flavor fails, but like we have flavor fails all the time. Like I can use Gideon's sacrifice to save Gideon or something. Like I don't know, right? Or I could have an Eldrazi team up with Phyrexians or something. Like I don't know, right? We can always break the story. But in this case, I think the mechanic makes the game worse. But I do understand, like, why are there two legendaries, right? Like, why do you have two Lilianas? Like I don't know, right? Dylan J9889, do you guys think for the rarity of Planeswalkers that it's gonna stay at Mythic, Rare, and Uncommon after this set? Also, was it wrong to be upset that the art for Gideon didn't have him in the original Dakon Blackblade pose?
I don't think it's wrong to be upset. That would have been cool. I think that we're going to go back to normal in general. I think that we'll see Mythic Planeswalkers and not lower rarities. I think that with War of the Spark looking like it's going to be extremely successful and well received, that we'll probably see this again. But I don't think I expect Planeswalkers to just be at uncommon and rare in every set or anything.
Do we typically get rare Planeswalkers? We do, right?
Not since the first Planeswalkers ever printed were rare, but since then they have been exclusively
Mythic. Oh, they've all been Mythic?
Yeah.
I can see rare Planeswalkers being a thing, but never like uncommon. Like I think uncommon is like special, and you might see one randomly. But kind of like how we see vehicles randomly show up. Maybe you'll see that, but I somehow still don't like it because it's hard to balance, right? If you just give like one random uncommon Planeswalker somewhere, it's hard to balance. Hate Bears for Life. Do you guys think the success of Humans in London was partially due to the open deck list? Being able to know what kind of interaction you need in your opening hand seems ideal for that deck.
Yeah, I think that definitely helps. Knowing if you need like a Thalia or a Meddling Mage or one of your disruptive pieces compared to just like, okay, I want to keep the biggest creatures possible. I think that definitely is relevant, even though Humans isn't a deck that's going to like mulligan to 4 to find a certain card very often.
Yeah. Again, Penguin, what do you think about a Grixis Zombie Hunt deck that uses a triple transformative sideboard with Countryside Crusher, Tasigur, and Swan Assault?
Oh. That sounds super spicy. I guess I'd have to actually see the deck list, but I like the idea. It sounds fun at least.
All right, last question. 11 Vicious with the London Pro Tour out. People like to say Pro Tour. Mythic Championship. Everything is mythic now. What are your thoughts on the Mulligan rule and combo decks going forward? They had no real presence in the tournament, though Ad Nauseam had the highest win percentage. Would you be willing to test Ad Nauseam with the Mulligan rule?
Yeah, I mean, if that's something that people wanted to see, I would be willing to test it with the Mulligan rule. I think that part of it is the open decklist thing. I think that's a big impact on it. Like we were kind of just talking about, people being able to find the right silver bullet sideboard cards or hate cards for the matchup is definitely more detrimental to combo than it is to other styles of decks. But yeah, I would be interested in trying Ad Nauseam. I think the thing that I realized even before the Pro Tour, we were talking about it a little bit, is I feel like the format is so prepared for graveyard-based combo decks that it doesn't surprise me that we saw Ad Nauseam, a combo deck that still wins quickly, is hard to interact with, but doesn't use the graveyard do well. We also saw like Cheerios, which also kind of fits in that same space where it's a fast combo deck that benefits from the Mulligan rule, but doesn't use the graveyard. I think those are the decks that are really shining right now, with the format having open deck lists and being super prepared for the graveyard-based combo decks, because we didn't see Goryo's Vengeance reanimating things. We saw a lot of graveyard hate wrecking decks like Arclight Phoenix and Dredge, so I think that would be my next step as far as London Mulligans in Modern, is working on those combo decks that don't use the graveyard.
All right, that's all our fish mail for this week. Thank you to everyone who sent them in. If you have questions, send them to @MTGGoldfish with the hashtag MTGFishmail, and we'll get to your questions on air.
And I think that brings us to the end of episode 222 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. So, Richard, thanks for hanging out. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we will be back next week to talk about whatever sweet and interesting things have happened in the world of Magic. So, until then, enjoy the War of the Spark release this weekend, and yeah, this is the crew signing out.